We've done a lot of work to this car at this point. All the floors have been taken care of. The rockers are completely done. Now we're going to start closing up on the fenders, or the lower portions of the fenders. And at that point, all the metal work more or less has been done. But at this point, and this car's not even closed, we already have a couple hundred hours into this car. There was extensive damage. All the way into the A pillars, the B pillars, everything tied into the rockers was completely compromised. Floors were non-existent once we started getting after them. It's just that unforeseeable thing. You hope and pray that you don't have to have that much work, but effectively you can only do so much. And then you get to a point where there really isn't a situation where you can turn back. You have to fix what's there. Anyway, so now that metal work is done, now we're focusing on taking care of the rear end collision. At some point in time in this car's life, it was rear-ended once or possibly even twice. And we've taken care of most of the damage that was on the driver's side. Now we're taking care of the damage on the passenger side. This area is a little tricky, simply because when you close the trunk lid, there was no gap down here. The trunk lid was coming in contact with the fender, and you couldn't adjust it out because there's no room on the other side. And when you look inside the tire tub area, right here where the spare tire goes, you can see that all the metal there was buckled. So we have to give the car new memory, or in other words, the original memory. And the only way we can do that is under a test, or a load, I should say. So what's going to happen is Johnny's going to put a couple thousand pounds of pressure on this connection system over here, pulling it that way. We've already taken another tower over here and pulled the rear out some. Now we need to pull it over this way so that this area will move over and create the gap that we need. Once he puts pressure on that, I'm going to come in with the hammer and dolly, and I'm going to strike this area just to create the gap. The reason I'm using the dolly hitting it is that way I don't incorporate a bunch of dents into the car. Johnny?
Yeah, as you can see, we've got this car anchored down with some chains and hydraulic pumps. Now this frame rack is a $40,000 piece of equipment, and most shops usually charge about $250 to $350 just in setup time alone to get the car anchored into place. On top of that, they'll charge whatever their service rate is, whether it's 60 bucks an hour, 100 bucks an hour. Here we don't charge a frame rack setup fee. We just do everything flat rate. It saves the customer some money, and it's just nice to have this big tool. Now, as you can see, you know, it's a very expensive tool. It's not easy to use, so not just everybody can do this in their house or in their garage. To be able to pull this much memory out of all of this metal that's already welded together, has been hammered once before, it takes a lot of pressure. Ready?
Okay, he's easily got a couple thousand pounds of pressure on this, and now it's time for me to start driving this back. All right, we're going to see we actually have a gap now. And there you go, we now have a gap right here where we didn't. We only need to move it approximately 4 or 5 millimeters at the most, but it has given us exactly what we needed. You want to let the pressure off of it, see if it comes out? So now, Ariel's going to let the pressure off and see if we lose our gap. If we don't lose our gap, we incorporate a new memory. We didn't lose our gap, so therefore the memory is now there. New York Spider. This car's always been a mystery to me. Its lifetime on the road was probably about 10 years. 10 years. And let me tell you, this thing's had a very rough 10 years. There's nothing on this car that we didn't have to fix, it seems like. Front end damage, the rear end damage, the massive amounts of infrastructural rust, the floors repaired, the replacement. This thing didn't spend a ton of time outside either. I mean, this car spent its dominant portion of its life in a garage waiting for the day that it got saved. Well, we're kind of at that point. We've gotten to the point where the doors are all knocked down, sanded, finished, fixed, and now they're in primer. The hood is finished, fixed, and in primer. So next we're going to do is we're going to texture these floors so they never rust again. And then we're going to start doing the body work on this car. This car has taken an extraordinary amount of man hours to save. Now there are plenty of you out there quick to say, well, why bother? Well, here's the hook. There are too many spiders out there that have the damage this has, but it's hidden damage. And those cars are changing hands for a lot of money. And one guy's selling it, the other guy's buying it, and he's buying the problems with it. This is a car, its problems were fairly obvious once it was in our hands. So in that sense, it's always been an honest car. And now that it has been properly preserved and properly fixed and is in properly sound shape, it'll last the new owner's lifetime. I'm at a loss of words of what it has taken to get this car to this point. I was thoroughly surprised because I've never seen a car that had such a short period of time on the road have such a magnitude of problems. But the owner stuck through it and did the right thing, and he saved it because this car has somewhat of a personal attachment to him. And I can't blame him for doing that. That is actually a noble thing in my mind, because ultimately it has become a bit of a surprise to not only us, but obviously to his checkbook. And nobody wants to live vicariously through the customer's checkbook. We want to do the right thing, and we want to be doing it in an efficient manner. But ultimately here we are. Now the metal work is done. Now it is a very sound Spider. Now we get to do the body work and start heading towards paint. The motor's in the process of being built, so things are happening.
All right, so Johnny, what do you have going on?
Basically, I'm working on the Spider. One of the things we found in this car is that a lot of the paint, the original paint from the 70s, was cracked. A lot of cracking, so we can't paint over old paint that's especially cracked, because then that new paint will end up cracking. So I started grinding it out so we can go ahead and start doing some body work on this stuff. But what we're finding out, as I've been making some marks here, is that there's huge gashes. This car was pretty much been held together by body filler for since the 70s. And I guess instead of actually fixing these dents and related, just major damage, and instead of actually fixing it, what was going on is they just filled it. And so, if we need to definitely fix this stuff before we, end up doing any more body work on it. And make sure that the paint looks good. A lot of the, what we've been doing is taking out the acoustic dampening. We're going to end up adding a Raptor, which is kind of like a rhino liner. If those familiar with like truck beds, and it acts as an acoustic dampener. Plus, it looks pretty cool. So basically, what I'm doing now is making sure I identify all the dents, all the imperfections in the body itself. Once those have been identified and corrected, then we can continue on with body work. And once body work is complete, then we can go ahead and start painting the car to the owner's specifications.
So what is that's going on the passenger side quarter panel over there? Can you show us what's up with that? I hadn't seen that yet.
Yeah, another thing, when I was doing the body work on this, I just kept grinding down, and I just keep seeing Bondo and Bondo and Bondo. And so instead of actually fixing this, whoever had this car, whoever did work on this car, didn't actually correct the problem. What they ended up doing is just covering up the problem. And when you do that, you're going to end up having more problems in the long run. You need to add, this will eventually crack, the Bondo will crack, the paint will crack, and then it's just a series of bad events that's going to happen.
What I'm seeing here is that this quarter panel is kind of sucking in right there.
Right.
There's no...
Something would have impacted this.
Yeah, it doesn't have the the lines, the shape that it's supposed to. It looks like it just got hammered and they just filled it with body filler, and that's why the paint was cracking.
Yeah, exactly.
Wow, wow. See, and that's one of those things that is really difficult to deal with, because when you have a small budget for a car, we try to stick to that small budget, but we can't do anything about old body filler that's 30 years old or whatever it is, and it's cracking. Because if we, like you said, if we take brand new shiny very expensive paint and shoot it right over all that cracking, that brand new shiny very expensive paint is going to lift that old paint right where it's cracking. It's not going to fill those cracks, and we're basically just going to waste our time and money.
We're covering up a problem instead of eliminating the problem. So that this is the, by fixing this is the more cost-effective way in the long run, is to actually fix the problem. So instead of ignoring it, by covering it up, you're ignoring it.
Go. Make it a battery operated car. He's trying to bury a milk bone.
Okay, so Ariel's putting on the last final clean. That's a product that basically lifts up any sandy debris. And final preparations for getting some acid etch on the New York Spider. I cannot tell you how much work has been tied into this car just to make it structurally sound, just to get it to this point. And the relevance of this point is it's actually what we would consider the turning point. We've now made all the metal repairs that need to happen on it. We've metal finished for the most part just about the car that needs to be metal finished. Now it's time to start doing the body, where we start doing a little bit of filler work and we start to sand it down. We start to put surface or start moving towards color, in other words. But don't fool yourself. This has not been an easy job by any stretch of the imagination. The doors and the trunk lid are already in, prime shape, and they're primer waiting for the rest of the car to join them. But this car has been an insane amount of effort to get to this point. This is why you can almost never tell the true story of a car when you start telling it apart. Because you don't put the mask under body fillers and all sorts of trickery that people have done in the past to make something look okay. The inside of this car is going to get a textured Teflon coating. And we're going to put that on because effectively that's going to preserve this car for the rest of its life. And we're going to put the same Teflon coating underneath the car as well. Again, the whole process is to just completely lock in that metal. But first, before we do that, we have to put on an acid etch primer. In other words, we have to be able to secure that metal and change its metal engineer, so to speak, so it'll be a little more resistant to potential for us happening in the future. Right now, what's going to happen is Ariel's going to apply an acid etch over all this bare steel. Everywhere you see bare steel is where significant metal work has happened on this car. That's almost the entire car. There's very few things on this car we didn't have collateral issues
impossible to say. It was just keep cutting and keep cutting and keep cutting until you finally find solid metal that you can build back from. But again, at least we're at that turning point now where from this point forward we're making this car towards painting, not making the car towards securing it in sound condition. It's a big day.
Okay, as always, forget the noise you hear in the background. What you're seeing right now is everything is in green. The engine bay has not only green, but on top of the green there is a surfacer primer. You always want to minimize how much paint you put in an engine bay because the thicker the paint, the less chip resistant it is. I think you've probably heard me say that before. This stuff is acid etch primer, and it's on everything that has been worked on where the metal has been exposed. Now this was painted 3-4 hours ago, and it is incredibly toxic stuff. It's actually kind of hard to breathe in here right now because the stuff's still gassy, although it's dry. Anyhow, the New York Spider is getting a little bit further along down the road.
To all you sinners, you can sin at home, you can sin alone, you can sin on home, you can sin on